What is going on out there, alpha males? I thought it'd be a good time to re-put out an episode that I recorded. I think I recorded it last time I was in Death Valley. Spent a big chunk of my life in the desert Southwest. Know a thing or two about desert survival, so I thought I'd pass that on to you guys. You don't have to be in the desert to glean from this episode. It's really hot right now in lots of places across the country. Even me yesterday spent a big chunk of pretty much the entire day with very short breaks in the heat, going back and forth the Idaho-Montana border. I was going back and forth between the two, and even there it was hot, like mid-90s. So I know lots of places in the country are a lot hotter than that. And again, I've lived in some of the hottest places in this country and lived off-grid and worked outside. So I thought it'd be a good time with so much of the country being so hot at the time of this recording. We're talking mid-July in the year of our Lord 2023. Hope you enjoy it. And again, I don't think you have to be in the desert Southwest or in the desert to glean from this. Anywhere that's really hot right now, hopefully it helps. Before we get into today's topic, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and becoming a patron. With that, I'll plug in the bio if you want to skip it. Skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where we start. I am a servant of God. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT special response team in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news. All right, let's get into the day's topic, which is going to be desert survival. Now, right away, when I say desert, it may conjure up images of survival. I mean, deserts are known for being harsh environments where it is hard to survive. Deserts generally a place that lacks water and doesn't lack life, but life is, let's say life fights a little bit harder to hang on than it does in other environments like the eastern woodlands or the forests and farmlands of the Midwest or Europe. Desert itself conjures up images of a harsh environment. And likely so, the desert is a harsh environment, and it's not very forgiving. Now, you heard my bio. I mentioned that I was Marine Corps urban warfare instructor, also desert warfare. And I taught under Mojave Viper. Actually, I was with the very first group when they formed Mojave Viper. That's a Marine Corps, I don't know if it still exists, but it existed for quite a while in our global war on terrorism to teach our military, foreign militaries, urban and desert warfare. When I joined the Marine Corps at 17, I wanted to go off and see the world. I mainly saw two places. I saw Iraq and 29 Palms. 29 Palms, except for the terrorists trying to kill you, is very similar to Iraq. It is a miserable, dry desert. It is in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Very inhospitable, very hot, ridiculously hot. Just sand dunes and sand dunes upon sand dunes and wadis. So I have quite a bit of experience. Like I said, the vast majority of my time in the Marine Corps after boot camp and School of Infantry was 29 Palms, Iraq, 29 Palms, Iraq, 29 Palms. And again, I finished off my career as a instructor under Mojave Viper. Also, I talked about being the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Well, that large metropolitan area was one of the driest, hottest cities in the country, and very much in a desert. And although I was in an urban environment day to day, our training often was outside in the desert, in the heat, in the middle of the summer, whenever it was in the desert. Also, since I've spent large swaths of my life in the desert, I like to be outside when I'm not working, if I can help it. So I do quite a bit of my recreation I have done in the desert, going out wild foraging, spending time in the desert, obviously shooting, off-roading, things like that, hiking. So with that, let's move on to actual things that are going to help you. I just wanted to let you know that I have some experience with what I'm talking about. The desert is harsh. The thing that defines a desert is lack of rain, lack of precipitation, and largely lack of water. The number one thing you need to survive in the desert is water. And that comes as quite a shock from, I said I grew up in the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States. Water is abundant there. A lot of times your problem is too much water. Going to the desert, your problem is lack of water. Thankfully, God made us very adaptable creatures, the most adaptable creature on the planet. We are made in His image. We are strong. We are dominant. We are to have dominion over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Have dominion over whatever environment. And let's not forget that God's chosen people, they're from the Middle East. They're a desert people. I have never had the blessing to go to Israel in that area, but as I understand, it's quite hot and dry. We're made for that climate and that environment. That's the good news. That's some good news. So you need water. Water is the most important thing. Conserving water is the easiest because whatever water you have, you want to preserve it as long as you can. One of the ways you can do that is minimizing your activity in the middle of the day. You'll notice that a lot of desert creatures, in fact the majority, are nocturnal, not diurnal, meaning they move and do stuff at night for good reason. When you move and do physical activity, you create excess heat anyway. You don't want to create excess heat and sweat when it's the hottest out and you're losing water. So a lot of desert operations, whether tactically or for survival, happen at night. So go nocturnal. I know that goes against our base nature of being diurnal creatures. But again, the vast majority of desert creatures go nocturnal. Likewise, you, especially if you have a lack of water, going nocturnal. Going nocturnal can have a lot of advantages. And in the desert, generally there's little cloud cover and the skies are clear. And even at night, even on a night that's not a full moon, you can generally navigate and do things pretty well in the desert. You don't have that canopy and that cloud cover that you generally have in other environments. You let your eyes adjust at night, and you'll find after a while you can get around pretty good without night vision, without anything. You can get along pretty good in most deserts at night. And a lot of people wouldn't think of this, but deserts get quite cold at night a lot of times. Some deserts in the middle of summer, they can still remain quite hot. But since there is no canopy, no cloud cover, a lot of times it gets cold at night. And if it's cold, you want to be moving around. And when it's hot, you try not to move around and conserve that water. Another big thing about desert survival, if you can find water, the desert is a great place to be in a lot of ways. You mitigate a lot of the problems that you have in other environments. If you find water in the desert, an oasis, a creek that has water that's going to keep water, it can be an amazing environment. If you can find water, you generally will find shade. And you get a lot of advantages. You don't get a lot of the diseases and infection and things that you might get in other environments, especially if you're talking about like a survival grid down scenario. You don't get a lot of bugs in general. You don't get a lot of the stuff that bothers you in other environments, wetter environments. So there is some advantage there. And any desert that I've ever been in, whether it's a Sonoran, I didn't do much foraging, obviously, in Iraq. I was mostly trying to stay alive in other ways. But in the Sonoran Desert, especially the Sonoran and the Mojave Desert, where I've spent a vast majority of my recreation time, and I like to forage, I like to take the wife foraging, finding food is not really an issue. There seems to be an abundance of food. Things like yucca, which is in abundance, digging up and eating yucca root, and even making soap out of it and making, cordage and sewing material and even making its own needles and things like that. Yucca fruit, agave, which I love to harvest. Maybe I'll tell you either in this episode or another episode, quite an adventure I had harvesting agave. But be careful with that. But agave, delicious, nutritious, is in abundance in desert environments, especially in the Sonoran. A lot of cactus is edible. A lot of those things. So food in general is not a problem in the desert if you can find water. Easy to find food, especially foraging. So that's another advantage if you can get water. And again, most deserts will have some form of water somewhere. It might be few and far between. It might be 50, 100 miles to get to water. But once you get there, if you can make it that far, it's not a bad place to be. Speaking of conserving, we talked about going nocturnal. Now, how do you find water if there's no perceivable water in the desert? Well, the two best ways that I'm aware of if there's no visible water is getting it through evaporation and condensation. For this, you're going to need some kind of plastic. Hopefully you can find some in your environment or you have some. This can be as simple as a trash bag, as simple as, just a regular trash bag. Obviously, a heavy-duty trash bag is probably better. But you can take whatever desert plants there are and take them and smash them in a bunch of rocks, whether that's cactus, whether that's sagebrush. Whatever plant it is going to have some form of moisture. In general, cactus and things like that are going to have more moisture. Anything with deciduous with a broad leaf is going to have more moisture than things like your sagebrush and other things like that. But you can take those plants, put them between a couple of rocks, which are generally easy to find in the desert, smash them all up, put them in a bag, lay them out in the sun, especially a black garbage bag, and let them get really, really hot. And all that condensation will come, and then when it starts to cool down, hits the outside of that bag, you just put a low spot in that bag and that water will run down there and you collect it. Obviously, this is labor intensive and not the best way. Obviously, it's better to go and find water, but you can get water this way. Another way is to find a low point, a wadi, what you call it in the desert, a dry creek where there's no water in it, but dig down as low as you can inside a bend of a creek and dig a hole, lay your plastic on top, put a container in the lowest point of that, and then lay your plastic on top with rocks all around it to make like a seal or sand, pile sand around it, so it's an enclosed environment as much as you can get it, and then just put a small rock in the center of that so that the low point, when all that condensation hits it, drips down into your container, into your water bottle, into the empty soda can you found in the desert, into whatever it is. So you've essentially made like a large evaporation chamber where the things hit it and condensation hits when it hits that plastic and it rolls down into your container. This can be done. It takes time. Hopefully you're not stuck out in the sun. Hopefully you have some kind of shade. But if it's your only option, again, you can get water in the desert. Well, those are the two best ways. Let's talk about some do's and don'ts, some rookie moves. It's going to be hot probably in the day. Do not start taking off all your clothes. Take off your outer layer of clothes. But those that are acquainted and familiar with the desert people, the Bedouins, any military person that's been stationed in the desert, they quickly learn light-colored, loose-fitting clothing that covers most of your body is better. You're not out for a day at the beach. You're not out trying to get a tan, especially a sunburn. That's going to give you even worse problems. You're going to be cooler in general, not if you're mostly naked. You're going to be cooler if you have loose-fitting, light-colored clothing that doesn't touch your skin. You still want to be able to sweat and that sweat to evaporate. As humans, that's what makes us great at doing physical activity in the heat. That's one of the ways we are successful hunters. And our ability to disperse heat is kind of unrivaled in a lot of ways as far as other creatures. God made us that way. But you want loose-fitting clothing so you still can sweat and that sweat can evaporate, but you don't want the sun beating down on your skin, making you hot. If you've ever, just in any environment, when you step out of the shade and into the sun, you know what a vast difference that can make and how hot or cool you are. Well, make your own shade by having that loose-fitting, light clothing. Now, let's say that you have found that water. If you're making it like the ways we talked about with the evaporation, don't waste it on cooling your skin. Drink it. You need it. Do the rest of the things we're going to talk about. And another way that I should mention is you can drink urine. It sucks. Yes, I have done that before. Welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. I've been in some pretty hot, dry desert environments. That does work. You want to do that only if you absolutely have to, because there's things in there that's not good for you. But if it comes between that and dying, then you got to do what you got to do. But if you have found some water and you have a creek or something and you're not making your own water the ways we talked about, which is quite labor intensive, don't waste it, drink it. And I should mention, don't drink it all at once. Don't guzzle it no matter how thirsty you are. Slowly sip it. That's going to, from what I understand, I'm not a biologist, but you're supposed to absorb more of it that way. So slowly sip it. And the worst thing you could do is drink a bunch of it and vomit, which you just wasted the water that you worked so hard to get. So sip it slowly no matter how thirsty you are. But if you have an abundance of water in the desert, if you found an oasis, or if you have a supply of water, a water buffalo, anything like that, a way to cool down when it's super hot out, when you're doing physical activity, when it's 100, 110, even hotter outside, is evaporation. Now, obviously, your body does that with sweat, but if you can dampen your clothes, one of my favorite things is those neck gaiters. I've been using those for a long time before COVID was a thing, the 100% polyester neck gaiters. Dipping those in water and then putting those around your neck, because your veins flow through your neck, obviously. A lot of blood flows through there. Wherever your veins and arteries come close to the skin, you can really use that evaporation to your advantage to cool you down, and it's amazing how well it works. So getting your neck gaiter, your whatever piece of fabric cloth it is, you can literally do it with a washcloth. Dipping it in water, unless you have just more water than you could ever use, putting it in a small container, cutting the lid off of a gallon jug or something, and just putting a little bit of water in there. Because if you try and dump it on, it's going to take a lot of water. But if you just put, a half a cup full and dip it in there, you're going to get quite a bit of things wet with that. And so taking that neck gaiter, taking your shirt, dipping it in there, and then putting it on can really, really cool you down in a hot desert environment. And again, taking that wet fabric, and anywhere where your veins and your arteries are close to the skin, your neck is a really good spot, your wrists are a really good spot. Anything like that. I mean, if you've got all the water you can use, by all means, make your whole shirt wet and put it on. Another tactical tip, real quick, no matter how hungry you are, if you don't have water, don't eat food, because digestion takes water. And you want that water for survival. If you don't have any water but you have food, don't eat the food. It's going to make it worse. Now, once you get enough water and you can drink water, it's important to eat food. But know that food takes digestion, and digestion takes water. And that takes quite a bit of energy and water. So if you don't have or have very little water, don't eat. Just suck it up and be hungry and get through it until you can get water. And then you drink water and then eat. I think that's probably all the tips I have for you for desert survival. And hopefully you listen to this. I know that this doesn't apply to a lot of people. I mean, if you live in, Germany, desert survival might not really apply to you unless you travel a lot. But probably you can extrapolate some of these tips for a hot summer day, for if you're in an environment where the only dirty water, you can still use those techniques to make clean water. Whatever the case might be, you're going to a training class, a firearm shooting class out in the desert with no AC all week, and it's crazy hot like it is at Front Sight or at Gun Sight, both of which are, I believe, the nation's two biggest firearms training schools, of which I am an instructor at one. I don't do it anymore just because I don't live nearby, but both of those, ironically, one's in like Phoenix and one's in just outside of Pahrump, which is near Las Vegas, both of which are ridiculously hot desert environments. So if you're going to like a training school in a super hot environment, this might help. Or anytime you're in extreme heat or an extreme dry or you can't get clean water, hopefully this helps you out. If you are going to one of those training classes we just talked about, that's going to tie in with the tactical tip of the day. In your duffel bag of stuff that you have, snacks, whatever you're bringing, you're probably going to have some gun maintenance stuff if you're going to a firearms training class. A couple of things that really save time, especially after a long, hot day on the range. Some of that gun scrubber, the aerosol gun scrubber, you can use some of the plastic safe carburetor cleaner and the other type of cleaners that are plastic safe on a lot of firearms. Some firearm finishes don't use them on. Best bet's probably just get the gun scrubber. The brake cleaner does work on a lot of guns, but I once did that on one of my very fine Kimber rifles and took a big section of the camo paint off of the factory finish on there. So your best bet, again, is the gun scrubber. It's basically just an aerosol. And combine that with a bore snake and combine that with REM oil. Now, there's a lot of good lubricants out there. REM oil is just good if you're in a hurry. The big aerosol ones, what I like to do is spray the gun down first with the oil and then let it sit for a few minutes, maybe run a bore snake through it, and then spray all the parts down with that gun scrubber. And it basically just washes it all clean. Maybe a toothbrush if it's really nasty real quick. And then spray it again once it's all wiped down and clean with the gun scrubber. I find that letting that REM oil sit on there really breaks that up a lot better and it works a lot better. And then spraying it a final time with the REM oil and then wiping it down. So real quick, you're going to spray it with your REM oil, let it sit. Spray it with your gun scrubber, let it sit. When it's done, pull a bore snake through it. Probably pull a bore snake through it on every stage, depending on how dirty it is. And that should work for most of your semi-auto rifles, handguns, even bolt actions, whatever it is. And that's a good, quick, easy way to get it clean. And after a long, hot day in the range, I know we should like Q-tip everything and get it all super clean, but that's a good way to get it fairly clean in a very quick manner. If you don't want to use that or don't have it or can't get it because you're just in an area where they don't have it, rubbing alcohol. The highest percentage you can get, like 90% rubbing alcohol, will do pretty much the same thing. Aerosol is a lot more convenient, but if you just wash it out with the rubbing alcohol instead, and rubbing alcohol is cheap, it's like $1 or $2. I did that last night. My wife and I went to the beach, and she thought it'd be funny to let a big wave get me all wet without telling me when I was posing for a picture, without her remembering that I had a gun in my pocket. So I spent that night cleaning that out and making sure it didn't get rusty, because, salt water will do that. But rubbing alcohol and then that rem oil in that order. Really a quick, effective way to make a gun very clean in a very short amount of time. Make sure whatever you're using, the gun scrubber or the alcohol, make sure you let it get dry first. Lay it out unassembled and let it get dry. That is going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Again, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. You as an alpha male, as a man, you rule over your body. You don't let it rule over you. The culture, the world, society will tell you, give into your body, give into its lusts, give into whatever it wants. That'll make you happy, but it won't. You have to look no further than a heroin addict for that. Likely that gives, I've never done heroin, but likely that gives their body great pleasure. That gives their fleshly lust great pleasure, but it does not bring happiness. Look at any heroin addict a couple of years down the road and see where it brings them to give in to all their fleshly desires. You as an alpha male, you rule over your body's desires. I'm not telling you to ignore all of them. I'm telling you they're a part of natural order, and you recognize them, and you as a man decide which ones you're going to allow your body to have. That's the right order, the proper order. And your litmus test for which ones are good or bad, of course, is the Word of God, is the truth, is the Bible. Remember that as a man. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. You'll find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. With that, men, I want to say thanks for listening and have a blessed day. I guess I forgot something. I got to come back and record this. So, postscript. If you want to support the podcast, please consider Good Shepherd Training and Patreon. I don't do this podcast for the money. I did it for years at a loss, meaning I worked other jobs to pay for this podcast. The more popular this podcast has gotten, the more it's cost to put out, and the more I think people come to expect, which is a good thing. That's what you want, right? You want something to grow and bear fruit. That means I recently stepped down from my general manager job because I just couldn't work all those hours and give the attention to this podcast and Simple Man sermons and gunfighter life that they deserve. I think that they warrant. But with that, the way that those run and are supported are Patreon. So if you think this is a ministry, a men's ministry, alpha male podcast, making men more resilient, stronger, something lacking in our culture and our society today in a godly way, if you think that's a ministry worth supporting, I hope you'll consider becoming a patron. And again, you can do that at goodshepherdtraining.com, and there's a Patreon link on there, goodshepherdtraining.com. I want you to do it because you believe the content is worth it and you get something out of it. But also, there's a really cool chat on there of really good guys, and I learn as much from them as they do from me, I'm sure. We help each other. We're a virtual tribe of strong men that help each other, iron sharpening iron. And if you think you need to be part of a tribe like that or would benefit from being part of a tribe like that, that's a perk of being a patron. Also, I do put some insider content on Patreon from time to time. I mostly want you to get on there and support because you think this is a ministry and a podcast worth supporting. So if you think that that's true, as they say, put your money where your mouth is, consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and supporting on Patreon. With that, thanks, men. Have a blessed day.